Welcome, everyone. We're just going to give folks a few minutes to come in from the waiting room. All right, I think we'll get started. Again, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar, Closing the Gender Pay Gap. My name is Amy Etten, and I am the Vice President for Client Engagement at STEM Connector and Million Women Mentors. Million Women Mentors, or MWM, is the premier network dedicated to encouraging girls and women around the world to pursue, persist, and succeed in STEM careers. Our members include leading corporate, post-secondary, nonprofit, government, and K-12 organizations, all working to build a diverse, robust, and sustainable STEM workforce. An important piece of our work is ensuring that working conditions are favorable to employees that have historically been underrepresented in STEM roles. Tomorrow is Women's Equality Day, which commemorates the passage of the 19th Amendment to the US Constitution, granting women the right to vote. Today, Women's Equality Day gives us an opportunity to reflect on the continuing struggle for equality in the workplace and celebrate the successes that have been made. We are delighted and honored to have with us today 3 amazing women who will offer actionable guidance and advice to individuals and employers alike for how we can work together to ensure that we, as women individually and collectively, receive the fair and equal pay that we deserve. Before I introduce you to our first speaker, I want to let you know that you can use the Q&A feature to ask questions for the speakers. We will have a Q&A session at the end of this webinar. And furthermore, we will be recording this webinar and we'll share it out along with the slides in a follow-up email. So let's get started. I'd like to introduce you to Lisa Arnold, Senior Manager for Compensation and Benefits for Porsche Cars North America. She is a seasoned total rewards professional with more than 25 years of progressive experience in all areas of total rewards, including the design of base and variable pay programs, equity programs, global payroll, benefit, and wellness programs. Lisa has held various leadership roles in companies such as Cox Enterprises, Artivian, and Community Health Systems, driving results while enhancing the employee experience and increasing engagement. Lisa, thank you so much for being here. I'm afraid we can't hear you, Lisa. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. Perhaps if, oh, I think I hear you, Lisa. Okay, Lisa is calling in. Again, thank you all. We respect everyone's busy schedules and appreciate you so much being here. So I think if it's all right, we're going to move over to Pam and Lisa will follow next. I'm going to slowly introduce Pam so she can get ready. Pam Wheeler is the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at NFP. She's an accomplished leader with nearly 3 decades of experience involving diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging outcomes for employees, clients, partners, and communities. She works with leaders across NFP, building from the solid DEI and B foundation already in place to move the organization forward with deliberate action, measurable results, and continuous refinement. Prior to NFP, Pamela consulted with National Football League operations on their DEI&B efforts. And prior to that, she led the Women's National Basketball Players Association, where she accelerated DEI&B in a number of areas for the players. She also served as Director of Business Development for the Continental Basketball Association and General Counsel and Marketing Manager for Bob Wolf Associates and Arnold Communications. Pamela, or Pam, is also a lecturer in Columbia University's Masters in Sports Management program. She serves on the board of the U.S. Center for Safe Sport. She is a former member of the foundation board of the CUNY Graduate School of Public Health and Health Policy, and is a member of the Trustee Emeritus Board of the Women's Sports Foundation. She holds a BA from Dartmouth College and a JD from Boston University. Pam, thank you so very much for being here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for having me, Amy. I appreciate what we're trying to do here today because it means a lot to me. I've been feeling like I've been creating spaces for gender equity and equality my entire career. So this is just fitting that we would be doing this today. One of the things that I want to talk about is sort of starting at the very beginning. I think sometimes what happens is we talk about these things and people just sort of nod because they're afraid to say, I really don't know what you're talking about. So, I think it's even important for us to talk about what is equity? How does it fit within our entire scope of DEI&B, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and really talking about the differences between equality and equity. And I was on a call yesterday and we spent a great deal of time talking about this as well. And one of the things that's really important is sort of distinguishing between equity and equality. Equality is providing the same thing for every person. And the problem with applying the same thing for every person is not every person needs the same thing. So equity is meeting people where they are. And I think we've all probably seen that illustration of the folks who are watching a football or a basketball or a baseball game, and they're standing and they're over the fence watching it. And some of them everyone's standing on different boxes. And equality would be if we just gave everyone the same boxes across that fence. And that would be great, except people like me who are really short probably still wouldn't be able to see over the fence. And my husband, who's 6'2", would really be able to see over the fence. And so equity is really providing, I may need 2 boxes because of my needs. My husband may not even need a box, and maybe someone else needs 3 boxes. And so it's really important for us, I think, to understand what we're even talking about when we're talking about equity and equality. And so from that perspective, I think it's important for organizations, and what we try to do at NFP is to meet people where they are and provide those things which each individual needs. And in the space for women, again, not understanding that not all women, we're not a monolith. We require different things. We're all different. We're mothers, we're aunts, we're sisters, we're coaches, right? We're a number of different things. And so each of us need different things in our lives to help us be successful. And so I think that's one of the things that's really important that we try to look at NFP is what is it specifically that our women need, and likewise with all of our underrepresented groups, what do they need specifically to help them be successful? And then from that perspective, how do you actually implement it? And understanding that it may not happen overnight. And managing expectations and understanding the processes. One of the things you mentioned that I was the director of the WNBA Players Association for 15 years. I was the founding director. So I was the first director for the players when they unionized. And certainly what we accomplished, I negotiated the first 4 collective bargaining agreements. And they just negotiated one a year or so ago. So I negotiated the first 4. And certainly what we wanted to gain in that first one, we did not, right? We didn't gain everything that we wanted to gain in that first one. And so part of that was an evolution in understanding that we would not obtain everything that we needed in the first agreement, but always being mindful of what we needed to get to in the second agreement, and then what we needed to get to in the third agreement, and what we needed to get to in the fourth agreement. And so for companies, it's really important also to find out what our goals and objectives are, and actually creating the systemic and cultural foundation for which we can then grow upon. It would be easy to walk in and say, we're just going to start paying everyone the same amount of money. That's not realistic, right? And when you're talking about especially large organizations where you potentially may even have to do some leveling, because positions in one area of the business may be different from another area of the business. And so there's a lot that goes into this process. But I think the key thing is to be intentional about it and understand why it's important. I also, as part of the being the director of the WNBPA and the work that I'm doing now, I do speak a lot about gender equity and equality. And I usually start these talks with asking a question about the WNBA. And I usually ask people, how many people have heard of the WNBA? And for the most part, everyone will raise their hands, right? So we can't see, unfortunately, I can't see you out there, the 72, 75 or 76 women that are out there. I'd love to see you, but, and see your hands raised. But I usually ask the question, how many of you have ever heard of the WNBA? Most people have heard of the WNBA. And I then ask, well, what does it mean to you? And we get a myriad of responses. There's everything from it represents great societal value. It represents women's empowerment, a way for fathers and daughters to connect in a way that they never have been before. And then, so I got the social value. And then my next question is, how many of you have actually purchased a ticket? And not as many hands are raised from that perspective. And so that's the equity piece, right? The diversity piece is that we all agree that women should play basketball and that everyone should have an opportunity to play basketball. The equity, the inclusion piece is that we value that, however you value it, whether you think it represents women's empowerment, whether you think it's valuable for each woman, but we all value it. But then how many people are actually taking their dollars and going to the stadium and actually buying a ticket or encouraging their sponsors to actually support these leagues in women's basketball? And so that's the equity piece. That's the piece that we're missing. It's making that connection between the value and the economy. And it's the same philosophy as to why women make 7-8%, on the dollar versus men. We all agree that women should be part of corporate America. We're getting hired, but we're not being paid equitably. And then likewise, we're missing the belonging piece where we're bringing women to the table, but then how are we then making them feel as if they belong, giving them the authority and empowering them to make decisions while they're at the company? And so the first part is understanding what we're talking about, and then being intentional about creating the systems and cultures within organizations. And part of that is included in what you're doing. How do we get involved with Paradigm for Parity, where we're making pledges to actually have our leadership increased by a certain percent by year 2030? How are we actually utilizing metrics to measure where we are so we can get a baseline, and then from there hold ourselves accountable? Because if it matters, we measure it. Just like everything else, we measure ROI. We should be measuring how women are getting promoted, what cross-functional opportunities there are for women within organizations. And so we should be measuring these things as organizations and not just talking about it.
Thank you so much, Pam. That was really, it's just true. It's just right on. I mean, I think when you ask that question, how many of you have heard of the WNBA? How many of you have actually gone to a game, purchased a ticket? Like, I mean, that's just so, it's such a great visual, if you will. It really, you can feel the difference. It's a great example for feeling the difference. So thank you. And I look forward to hearing from you later during the Q&A session. So Lisa, we would like to invite you to share your remarks.
Can you hear me, like, at all?
Yes, we can, perfectly.
Oh, excellent. I just wanted to make sure, since we've had some challenges. I still, unfortunately don't have great video, so I apologize for looking like a ghost, but Pamela's right. I mean, there's so many things that we can do and need to do to ensure that we have equitable compensation. And one of the things I wanted to touch on is, what is compensation? In a lot of ways, it's fairly simple. That compensation is money that's received, wages, commissions, bonuses, and fringe benefits. Obviously, the fringe is that indirect compensation. And there are factors that determine what our compensation is and winds up being, and performance, your responsibilities. What's the market doing? What are the competitors? What are other people being paid? What does that look like? And then internally, what is the baseline within the organization of what's being paid? And most importantly, what leadership skills are you demonstrating? Regardless of what level, position you're in or you feel like you're in, that person that jumps in to help out, that always looks for more and looks for ways to do better, is always going to be seen as that leader. And if you have those leadership skills, even if some of your education or specific skills training, isn't at the very top, demonstrating those leadership skills, those team skills of being willing to jump in and help out, is always going to be appreciated and recognized, and that will help you having that compensation decision. The other thing that you need to think about, other than straight compensation, is, what are my benefits? For example, one of the things that I've seen over and over through the years is people look at the bottom line, for example, for your medical care. If your premium is really, really low per month and your deductible is great, it's really low, but it doesn't cover anything when you're actually sick or you need that care, that's not much of a benefit. So when you're looking at your internal business benefits, if you're working, if you're comparing officers, really take a look at those, entire encompassing package. What does the plans cover? What is its rate? If it has low per paycheck deductions, does it have a really high deductible that you have to pay up front before the plan pays one single penny? So there's a lot of ways to look at benefits. The other thing, look at what the employers do that are sort of soft benefits. Do they have fruit? Are they encouraging a healthy well-being? Do they have an on-site gym? What are those other services that are there that are soft? It may not be cash, but brings meaning to that, to your overall experience and your overall health as an employee. Know your strengths. It's really important when you're talking about knowing what you're worth is to really know your education, advocate for yourself. What have you done? What projects have you done? Research, even internships. You may have picked up, expertise in certain fields. Those intangibles that we talked about with leadership and jumping in and doing other things. Think about those soft skills. Think about, hot button issues, things about concerns of the, how you can help move things along. If there is a struggle and you can jump in to sort of help that, or you have. All of those things help determine, what you're worth, so to speak. And in knowing how much you're worth, it depends. We talked about things, your background compared to other people, the company's financial health. They may want to pay you more money, but they may not be able to actually give you that cash. So if they can't do that, what can they do? Can they give you more time off? Can they give you more of that work-life balance? More and more employers are moving to hybrid models or completely remote work sets. So can they do something that if they can't contribute to the bottom line, how else can they help support you? And then, when you're looking at things, know the market. What are the salaries that are being paid out there? What skills are in demand? Do you have those skills? If you went to a competitor, what would that look like? What is negotiable? The easiest thing to negotiate is vacation, time off, where you do your job, where you perform it. These are things to really look at that can make a significant difference, to your life. And, that's, really what I wanted to share, but I'm apologize for the video and the audio issues, but it is a real pleasure to be here and join you guys.
Thank you, Lisa. We're so happy to have you here. And I have to imagine that there's not a single person on the panel or in the audience who has not encountered a tech problem at some point. So please, I regularly, recently have been finding myself saying, give yourself grace a lot, and I mean it. But I also just wanted to comment on, your suggestions to negotiate in areas that you might not have previously thought negotiable. I think a lot of people go into job negotiations thinking about only the salary and might not even think that it is a possibility to discuss flexibility around those other benefits. So I think that goes back to just knowing your worth and feeling confident enough to ask. But I am not the expert. And so, unfortunately, we have more experts on the line. So with that, I am now pleased to introduce you to Meggie Palmer. She is the founder and CEO of PepTalkHer. She founded PepTalkHer with the mission of closing the gender pay gap. And she also has a PepTalkHer app, the organization does, that helps individuals track their career successes. It actually uses artificial intelligence, STEM, to coach and your confidence and negotiation, and to give you a pep talk when you need it most. She is a highly sought after speaker, a facilitator for Fortune 500 companies, focusing on supporting teams to elevate their performance. And we're so lucky to have her. The PepTalkHer business team runs corporate programming for brands, name brands, big brands, some of the companies, the world's largest employers. They work in-house with companies to help retain high potential staff. They run programs around confidence building, negotiation, fostering an inclusive workplace. She also lectures at Columbia University and Barnard College. In her former life, she was an award-winning journalist turned entrepreneur. She spent 15 years as a journalist and foreign correspondent, traveling from Syria to Italy, telling stories for networks including BBC World, CNBC, Channel 7, and Vogue. Meggie, thank you so much for being here today.
It's a pleasure. Thanks so much for hosting me, Amy, and what a treat to be in the company of Lisa, Pamela, and all the wonderful people that we've got joining us here today. Thanks everyone who's put their title and the city that they're joining from in the chat. Thank you. That's been awesome to feel like we can connect. I'm here in New York City, so I'm Australian, hence my unusual accent. Don't hold that against me. But if you haven't already, let us know in the chat where you're joining us from today, so we can shout you out and say hi. But thanks so much for having me, Amy. I'm happy to take questions as we go. I know we're going to have some time at the end for a Q&A that Amy is going to kindly moderate, but I thought I'd share with you all a little bit about my story today. As Amy mentioned, I'm a former journalist. I was a foreign correspondent for 15 years. And so coming into the tech world was quite the leap. And we can chat about that and some of the challenges that I faced along the way in a second as well. But yeah, love to hear from you in the chat where you're joining us from today. And if you've got questions about compensation, about pay, about transitioning or transferable skills, or if imposter syndrome is something that's creeping in for you, let me know in the chat so that we can address as many of those questions in the 10 minutes or so that I have to chat with you today. And a quick shout out to any moms on the call today. I've got an 11-week-old and the juggle is real, and I never understood it properly and fully until now. And so I want to give you all virtual medals because it's a lot, and I don't know how you all did it through the pandemic. So I just want to virtually hand out medals to those of you with kids at home doing the juggle. It's a lot. But as Amy mentioned, my name's Meggie and I'm Australian. I've been in the United States for 6 years now, but I spent 15 years of my career as a reporter in Australia, in London for the BBC World, for CNBC, I worked for Dateline, and then here in the US, I was working for the Financial Times as well. So it took me all around the world, from Syria to Zimbabwe and most countries in between, interviewing people, everything from like Will Ferrell and Brad Pitt all the way through to Bashar al-Assad. So I would cover a lot of different things, from politics to conflicts to, entertainment occasionally, hence the Brad Pitt interview. So I loved my job. It was awesome. But something happened to me in my career that really changed the course of my life, and is why I'm chatting to you today. I accidentally found out that I was getting paid less, and that my conditions in my contract were quite different to that of my male colleagues. So I just thought they'd made a mistake. I was pretty naive, and I raised the issue. I was like, hey, this isn't cool. What's going on there? And they basically gave me two options. They're like, Meggie, if you don't like it, you don't like the worse conditions and the lower pay, you can quit, or you can take us to court. So that was the situation that I found myself in. And, I want to acknowledge the fact that it was a bit of a privilege, really, that I'd gone through my life and a lot of my career until I had that moment where I experienced such discrimination. And for me, it was that moment of the blinkers were coming off. And I appreciate, that happened to me later in life. And some of you have probably experienced that a lot earlier in your career. And if you feel comfortable, please let me know in the chat, your experience. I would love to hear from you. You can send it to me privately or to the entire chat. But they said to me, you can quit or we can go to court. And so I felt quite compelled, actually, to stand up. Because, I had savings, I backed myself to get another job. I didn't have children or a mortgage at that point. So, I felt like I had to say something. I felt really compelled to do that. And so I got a lawyer, and long story short, I left that company, not surprisingly. But that kind of started my journey to understand the gender pay gap a lot better, and Lisa and Pamela have kindly talked to us already a little bit about some of those equity issues and the compensation issues that come up for everyone, and particularly those of us in professional tech careers, right? Because we know that gap is significant, and it depends on your industry, it depends on your title and your seniority, but we're looking at about a 15 to 20% pay gap overall. And I don't have time to jump into the minutiae of what causes that and all those kinds of things, but keep it in mind that there is a gender pay gap that exists, and it may or may not be affecting you depending on the company that you're at, depending on the way that your compensation is structured, as Lisa talked us through a little earlier, right? And so, these are the statistics, and this is what's going on. And it's important that you're aware of that, right? As you navigate your career and as you manage teams as well, right? Like, so that you can best support your colleagues as well. So what I realized was that I'd been underpaid and undervalued. And so in my future jobs, I was very focused on making sure that didn't happen again to me, and indeed to people that I managed in the future as well. So I ended up tripling my salary in around 3 years, which was awesome, but it didn't solve the core problem of the gender pay gap in the first place, right? Because I want to also just state that, like, none of this is your fault. None of this is our fault. The fact that the pay gap exists, the fact that this unconscious bias happens to us, it is not women's fault. It is not people of color's fault that they are paid even at an even higher level of discrimination than women, right? We know that women of color are paid, there's an even bigger gap for women of color, right? And Indigenous women as well. So it's not our fault, but it's important that you understand that this is a problem, right? Because if we're aware of this, we can go in eyes wide open when we're having those conversations, when we're negotiating our pay, and indeed when we're hiring others as well. So that's why it's really important to me to shine a light on this issue and to talk about this so that we're all aware of it, right? So that we can do what we can. So I was like really interested in like, what can I do to help close that gender pay gap, right? Because when we break it down, we know that there's 3 key factors that affect that discrimination in pay, right? So one of the factors is that women are more likely to have time out of the workplace, whether that's for caring responsibilities, for parental leave, things like that, right? So that's one of the factors, but statisticians, much smarter than me, have accounted for that, and they can actually take that out of the equation. So even when you take out having children, caring for relatives and stuff, when you take that out of the equation, there's still a gender pay gap, right? That gap still exists, right? So then researchers looked at this and they thought, okay, what else could be causing this? The fact is that women, when we go to college and stuff like that, the types of jobs that we've been socialized to want to go into, the types of courses that we are more likely to study are typically paid less than the types of courses that men, people who identify as male, are more likely to go into. So we see more women in, for example, teaching roles, which are paid less than, for example, like banking. So that's another factor, is the sorts of roles that women are socialized to want to do in the workforce. So researchers took that out of the equation too, and they're like, well, we can actually account for that, and we'll take that out of the equation. So even when you take both of those 2 factors out of the equation, there is still a gender pay gap, right? And that gap, researchers cannot explain. They don't know what causes it. And so the hypothesis that they have is that it's unconscious bias and discrimination. So that is the piece of the puzzle that I'm particularly interested in. And that's the piece of the puzzle that I want you all to be aware of. Because I believe that at a grassroots level, we actually can do something about that. And that's certainly what PepTalkHer, my company, is on a mission to change, right? So we can't change everything. We know that it's going to take government policy, it's going to take business policy to make those shifts. But then while we're waiting, because the UN reckons it's going to take 100 to 200 years, right? And I was just kind of like, when I was researching this and working with a lot of professors who've been studying this for decades, I just wasn't prepared to kind of wait for 100 years, such that my nieces and nephews, that I could be satisfied that they would still be facing the same discrimination. And so what PepTalkHer does is really focus on how can we actually shift things at that grassroots level, right? And so that's the company that I founded. It's called PepTalkHer. We have an app that you can download. And in fact, our Android friends who are on the call today, I'm an Apple gal, but if you have the Android app, if you go into the Android Apple Store today and the rest of this week, PepTalkHer is actually being featured as part of Women's Equality Day. So you can check out the feature on the Android App Store today as well. But anyway, so we built an app because I wanted to be able to help women at scale, because I started helping friends and friends of friends to kind of explain to them how I was able to triple my salary in 3 years. So I was kind of paying that knowledge forward. But there's only so many conversations that I can have in a week, right? Like I was like, how can we incrementally help people? And that's why I love technology. And that's why I love, the fact that everyone here today is passionate about careers in this field, because you can make such significant impact in the world through the work that you're doing. And so I'm really excited about that. And that prospect excited me too, which is why I wanted to make sure that we could build a solution that was scalable using technology, so that we could be helping people while I was asleep, or people in other countries that I'd never even been to. And so basically you can download it. It's totally free. It's kind of like a brag book. It's like, like a Fitbit, but it's for your career, if that's a good analogy. So it'll send you a prompt. It'll be like, Lisa, what's up? What are you really proud of this week? Or Pamela, what do you want to remember come pay review time? And you can kind of like type in like, I secured a new client. I increased traffic to the website by 20%. I fired that person who was problematic, whatever the case may be, you can kind of track your successes. And we know from neuropsychology that actually the more that we focus on the successes that we have in our career, the more that those neural pathways get stronger and stronger and stronger, right? And so that helps us to combat if you've been experiencing imposter syndrome or if you're struggling with any confidence issues, that's going to help with those things, right? And the reason that's important is because when you walk into those pay review conversations, I want you to walk in there knowing that you 110% deserve this raise. I don't want you walking in there like, oh, like maybe could I please? No, like that's not the energy I want you to channel, right? Because again, we know from research that actually if you walk in there with confidence, if you walk in there with data from the app, you know, with those successes, with metrics, if that is quantifiable, and if you've written that down, if you can take that in, you are more likely to be successful. Right? Because no one owes you a pay raise. Like to Lisa's point and Pamela's point as well, like you've got to be a high performer. So that's the first thing. But once you're a high performer, which I know you are, because you're here today and you're invested in your growth, once you are a high performer, it's not enough that you know that you're amazing. Like your boss has got to know that too. You know, your team has to know that. So you've got to track those metrics so that you can bring that into conversation, so that you can drop that into meetings, and especially so that you can use that data and those examples when you're having your performance reviews. So that's really what the app helps you do. And I'm a non-technical founder, you know, came from a journalism and business background, so it was quite the leap. And if anyone else is building an app out there, feel free to message me on LinkedIn and we can chat about the pros and cons. But it's been a really interesting journey, right? And so, you know, we've been able to support more than 60,000 women, people who identify as female around the world through the app and through our programs from the consumer side. And then, and we're super proud that, you know, I think we're actually closer to 4 million now in terms of the number of pay raises people have received. I had a text this morning, someone got a $15,000 pay raise. One of the women who uses the app, she got a 14% raise when everyone else was only getting 5% in the business. So like, we're really proud of the impact that we're having, because I'm going to talk to you about this in a second, but like, you need to start thinking about your financial security now, right? Like the best time was yesterday, but the next best time is today or tomorrow, right? Like I want you to start to think about that and to prioritize that. Because it was really interesting when I was doing my research for the app, so many women that I spoke to said to me, I don't need any more money. I probably am underpaid, but I don't actually need any more. I'm paying the mortgage. I'm going out to dinner once every 2 weeks. Like I'm good. And I was like, yeah, but like, if you're underpaid, why don't you want more? And they're like, because I don't want people to think I'm a bitch. Excuse my French. I don't want people to think that I'm high maintenance. I would actually rather stay the same than have that conversation. And that's really interesting to me, right? And so what we're trying to do is really just sort of shift perspectives around that. I understand that it's not ideal always to have those courageous conversations, but when you do, and when you get a $10,000 raise or $30,000 raise, we've actually had 3 students. This is pretty bananas. 3 of our students have had $100,000 plus pay raises, which is amazing. And obviously that's life-changing money. They were earning 200 plus to start with, but still like that's a significant raise for them, right? So it's truly game-changing. And I'll always say to these people, I was like, if you don't need it, that's fine, but please take the money, give it to your niece, give it to your favorite charity. I don't mind what you do with it. You can give it away. That's totally fine. But I would love for you to have that in your pocket if that's fair compensation for your role and title, rather than it stay with the business. And so, you know, we have a huge community, and I would welcome anyone to obviously join. We've got a heap of free resources that you're more than welcome to check out, but we work a lot in-house with Fortune 500 companies, you know, Salesforce, SAP, PwC, brands like that, to support their female talent as well. Because, you know, as Pamela and Lisa both alluded to earlier, companies really want to retain top talent, and in particular, female talent, right? So this is an amazing time to be in your existing career or to be considering changing careers as well. And, you know, like we spend a third of our life at work, right? You know, I was reminded this week, a friend of mine lost her mum, and it just reminded me, you know, like we're a long time dead. Like life is very short, and we spend a third of it in the workplace. And so it would be so exciting for me if the time that you had in the workplace was time that you thrived and that you enjoyed and that you loved and where you felt really valued, you know, and money is a part of that, and compensation is a part of that. And it does matter, you know, and every pay raise that you get, every conversation that you can have to get a successful raise or a promotion or whatever the case may be, better benefits, like Lisa mentioned, it's not always about cash. might be annual leave, it might be better health insurance, whatever. Every step gets you closer to a financially secure life, right? And where I'm from in Australia, there's this awful statistic, which is that the fastest growing group of homelessness is women over the age of 50, right? And that's scary. That's scary. And I don't want that to be anyone in this Zoom room today. And I don't want that to be anyone that you know in your network as well, right? So that's why financial security is so exciting to me. And that's why I'm, so passionate. It's not just a moral and ethical issue, the pay gap. The other thing is that we know that that this is actually, when we pay women fairly and equitably, it actually increases the success of businesses and indeed of countries' GDPs as well. So this is a much broader issue, and I could talk about this all day. But feel free to send through any questions, and I'm happy to take those questions as well. But yeah, there's a heap of free resources on the website. I'm just taking a look at the questions that have come through. Thank you for sending those through. I appreciate it. Amy, I might just jump into this question. Do you want me to do that really quickly? And then we can throw it to Lisa and Pamela too, because they'll probably have some thoughts on this.
Absolutely, that would be great.
Okay, cool. So Rachel, really appreciate this question. And I think Lisa and Pamela will definitely have some thoughts on this. So sometimes you'll be in a situation where your manager or your direct boss is really valuing your work and wants to give you a raise. But sometimes further up the food chain, it gets denied. Right. And so, we can only control what we can control. Right. And so what I would say to you is it's really helpful to make sure that you go in with data, because not only are you trying to convince your boss, you're trying to make it easy for them to run it up the food chain to convince their boss. Because if they know, let's say you're in a revenue generating role, they know that, there's $300,000 of sales directly attributable to your role. If they know that, and if they know that you're a flight risk of maybe leaving, then for the sake of $20,000 to retain you in the business, or $10,000 or $50,000, whatever it is, if those numbers are there in black and white, it's a lot easier for someone to say yes to that raise for you, right? And the other thing you need to realize is that you actually have power in these conversations. If you leave a company, and again, Lisa could speak to this, no doubt, the cost to recruit to replace you is significant. They lose all your institutional knowledge, which is not ideal. They have to recruit, which is annoying and time consuming, but it costs businesses money, anywhere from 10 to 30K up into the six figures for executive recruiting costs, right? So actually companies are incentivized to give you a raise because it's cheaper often for them to give you a raise than to replace you. Now, sometimes there's a pay raise freeze. Sometimes the company hasn't got any more money, they literally have not got more room in the budget. And that's where, to Lisa's point earlier about the full compensation benefits, you've actually got to think creatively. If they say no, okay, how can we continue that conversation? That's disappointing. Let's revisit that in 6 months' time. Would you consider an extra 5 days leave for the next, 12 months as compensation for the fact that there's no more money in the budget? That's just one idea, but I'd love to hear, Pamela, your thoughts on this as well. I know you've done a lot of work around this.
Yeah, and again, what we're trying to do is trying to create the systems and cultures where individuals don't have to bear the burden themselves. And that's where we are with women, right? I mean, we're constantly having to be the ones. I remember interviewing a few years ago, and I was taking my Louis Vuitton bag, and my husband was like, "Don't take that bag. They're going to think you have money." I'm like, why should I have to worry about whether or not I take a Louis Vuitton bag or not? But so what we're trying to do at NFP is take the onus off of the person by creating the systems and cultures within our organization that allow so that these things happen organically and objectively and not subjectively. And so what you do is we're trying to put things in place where we don't ask for your prior salary on job applications. What does it matter what you made before? If this job is paying $150,000, why do I need to know that you made $75,000 at the last job? If I think you're capable of doing the job, then you should be able to get this job without me having to know that. So a lot of companies are going to that. So we're trying to do things like, eventually we'd love to have a pay equity audit throughout our whole organization. But in the interim, what companies can do is they can do leveling within departments, right? So you can start there. You can start with leadership. Leadership at the top levels can look at all of their direct reports, and from there, they can level that out. You can also have, if you're a hiring manager and you are responsible, or you're a manager and you're responsible for 10 people, you can actually conduct your own mini audit. You can actually say, today, I'm going to look at everyone in my organization, and not only the people that are there, who are there now, but when I hire someone, I'm going to make sure that when I hire someone, I'm looking at all of the people that are in my organization, my direct reports. And so we can start. I mean, sometimes I remember in law school, one of my professors used to always say, stop looking for 5 hours to study. You don't have 5 hours to study, right? You probably got 20 minutes here and 20 minutes there. So sometimes we're trying to bite off too much of the apple. Take a little smidget if that's what you can do right now. And for those who are on the lines who have the capability of doing that, or either influencing within their sphere of their organization, go back to your manager and say, can we look at, it's end of the year coming up, there are going to be performance reviews. Can we just look at our 10 people here? And then from there, we can spread it out. But there are things that we can do to take the burden off of women and other underrepresented people. And that's where also mentorship and advocacy is very important. And I don't mean, and sort of, I kind of hate the term access to leadership, because I don't know what that means. The CEO showing up once a year at a luncheon for resource groups is not access to leadership, right? Access to leadership is actually having someone who's a member of the leadership team sitting in a meeting and talking to, the chief diversity officer is talking to the chief marketing officer, who says, I'm looking for a new marketing salesperson. And I'm sitting there as a Black woman saying, you know what? I know this Black woman in this other area of the business who would be great for that job. That's advocacy. That's someone actually sitting in the leadership table and actually pushing for other people. And that's what we have to do a little bit more of, not just having leadership aspirations, but actually having people who are sitting in leadership actually bringing people along. And so I think those are some of the things that we could do immediately that would solve some of these issues for us.
Totally agree, Pamela. The advocacy and sponsorship is crucial, isn't it?
Thank you both. Lisa,
yeah, it really is.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, Pamela is exactly right. Understanding talent, advocating for the talent we're aware of is really important. And, that's where you can also step in yourself and let people know you're interested about doing other things and learning about more. But if you know a rock star and you can, help get some attention to them, I think we all absolutely have a responsibility to do that.
Yeah, and the other thing is what tends to happen with underrepresented groups, just like women, women are part of that underrepresented groups, we get siloed. So if you're a woman in a particular area, you're never going to move. And if you're someone in technology, you tend to stay in technology. And people who ascend to leadership in organizations have cross-functional opportunities and have the ability, because they can then make the interconnections between the success of the organization. And so it's vitally important that we continue to move women throughout different parts of the organization. Just because you started off in marketing doesn't mean you need to stay in marketing. You need to get some finance under your belt. You need to get some customer service under your belt, because then what's going to happen is you're going to be able to bring all of that to the table, which will help you to ascend to leadership. Because I always think about when I went to law school, one of the reasons why I went to law school is because I said, if that idiot can be a lawyer, I know I can be one, right? So, whoever that idiot is, and sometimes when you look at people in leadership, you say to yourself, I know if that person can do this, I know I can too. And oftentimes as women, like you said before, Meggie, what we do is we kind of just stay in our lane. I'm just going to stay here. I'm in marketing. I'm just going to stay in marketing. I'm not going to try to do anything else. Meanwhile, men are moving around the organization and ascended to leadership because they now know how everything works. And so that's another reason why advocacy and mentorship is so important, because those are the people who are in position to actually tap you and say, you know what, I'm going to get this woman a job over here, or I see something, I see that talent in her, even though she's in technology, she's in customer service. She could be in marketing too. So I think that that's what we need more of.
And like someone who can speak your name in the rooms that you're not in, like to your point, Pamela, if you're not in marketing, but you're in technology and you have a sponsor more senior in the organization who knows you or who's worked with you, or maybe you proactively reach out to them, right? To connect with them once a quarter, or maybe you take them to lunch twice a year or something. So they're in an exec meeting or a leadership team or a board meeting and they say, hey, you know what? Pamela would be great for this role. Let's interview her. Let's add her to the list. Or like, Amy should really be considered for this. Have you met her? People would be like, no. And well, I have. So let me vouch for them. Like that is like, Pamela, I'm so glad you said that, because it's game changing for your career, right? And I think sometimes there's a quote that helps me sometimes when I'm like acting from fear. It's called, it's leap and the net will appear. Right. So sometimes you might be like, I'm in marketing, I couldn't possibly, or I'm a VP, how could I possibly go for an exec role at that company or whatever? But sometimes if you leap, that net will appear, right? Like it can be scary, but like taking that step and who knows what will come of it. You might apply and not get it, but in 6 months, they're like, hey, that person didn't work out. We want you now. Or hey, we're starting a new team. You'd be great for this. So like, please back yourself and back others, to Pamela's point, be their sponsors and their advocates as well.
We still have some more time. We still have about 10 minutes. So please, anyone, feel free to use the Q&A feature. I will tell you that the first thing that I'm going to do after we all go our separate ways is download your app, Meggie. And the first bragging point I'm going to put in is that I organized and pulled you all together for this webinar, because I think this is such an important topic. I feel so energized and inspired and encouraged. Like I feel your hands on my back as I think about how to move my career forward. And so I just want to say thank you to all of you. So Jo, she's my boss, Dr. Jo Weber. Just letting you know, I'm putting that in my brag book that I organized this webinar. But any sort of,
yeah,
I'd love to go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm seeing people's a couple of comments when people are saying, how do you know you're underpaid? And in some ways, I think it is important, obviously, to know what the market will bear and what other people in the organization are making. But you can set your own worth too, right? So just because someone else may be making a certain amount of money, if I'm bringing additional assets to the table and I'm bringing something that that person isn't bringing, I could still advocate for myself. So I'm seeing a lot of people going, how do you know you're underpaid? Because you feel it, right? I feel like I'm not valued, because how much you pay me is how you value me. And if everyone else is making the same amount of money at my level, but I'm doing something extra, then I'm underpaid, right? So while I agree that we need to do leveling and we need to do all that, I think there's still a degree of it that's your own individual assessment of yourself and how much you think you're worth. And quite frankly, most of the time, another company might be more willing to pay you. Most people, when they move, they make more money. And so if your company isn't willing to pay you, then maybe another company will. So I get where some people are saying, how do you know you're underpaid or making less than everyone else? Most of the time you can figure that out, or someone lets it leak or whatever in a company. But a lot of it has to do with just how you feel about yourself and what you think you're bringing to the table.
Lisa, I have to imagine.
Sorry about it. If you are having conversations and people aren't transparent with where the pay is coming from, where the limits are, ask those questions. Most companies these days are very transparent with how they're basing what they're paying and why, where your skill set falls into that, and challenge them and talk to them. And if they're not able to do it, then there's some other benefit options if they don't have the cash, or as Pamela said, looking elsewhere may be your best alternative.
Yeah. That's so true, Lisa. Sometimes you've got to Pamela's point, know your worth. And then to your point, Lisa, you have to be willing sometimes to walk away. And that can be really hard. I was speaking to someone in our community the other day, and she'd been at her company for 18 years and she loved it and it was her family. But she said, I had to leave because I got these offers and my existing company wouldn't match them. And she said, when I left, it wasn't until I left that I realized that actually so much time had passed, it hadn't become healthy for me anymore. But she had to leave to make that realization, right? So having the courage sometimes to look elsewhere or to consider other options is not easy, but can lead to more compensation. And there's just a great question that's come through from Alicia asking about if you're mentoring college age students, how can they negotiate because they haven't had other jobs before, right? And I just wanted to quickly address that. When you don't negotiate your first job offer, which I did not, whoops, that was a mistake because it means that I'm going to retire on average with about 500,000 less than someone who did negotiate. My first salary, I think it was like $33,000. It was a while ago. But because I didn't get up to 34 or 35, it means that because of compounding interest and 401k and all that stuff, I'm going to retire with $500,000 less because I didn't have that conversation then. So something everyone can do today to pay it forward is if you've got a niece, a cousin, a friend who's got a daughter or someone who identifies as female who's going to be, getting a job in the next couple of years, please tell them to negotiate. And what they can do is use like work experience or internships or, projects that they've done at college. They can use that as their data points, right? Just because you haven't worked in a company doesn't mean you don't have skills and value that you can use in that interview process. And we've got some scripts and stuff as well that can be helpful for those people too, if that's helpful, Alicia.
Thank you, Maggie, for that. Lisa, did you want to add?
I just wanted to take the global compensation question. It can be really tough, but there are some great tools out there. We use the Mercer Index. It's updated twice a year, and it does look and help us look around globally on what is competitive.
Wonderful.
I see someone else had a question about addressing race within the context of this too. So I think it would be important to mention that too. That obviously Black women, women of color are paid even less, and not just pay, right, but job opportunity. And those, there's some folks on here from NFPs. They've heard me tell this story. I'm not going to tell the long version, but when I graduated from undergrad and I was going through one of those management training programs, I graduated right next to a white woman. And when we graduated, she got some major accounts, and I got accounts that were closing. And the only reason that I got some accounts subsequently is that I happened to know the highest ranking Black man in the company at the time. And my boss saw me go into his office one day, and all of a sudden, miraculously, I got new accounts. So, by mere fact of me even knowing him helped me, but it's not just the pay gap, it's opportunities that people of color, especially Black women, are missing out on because we're not being invited to we're not being invited to conferences. We're not being invited to conversations. We're not being invited to leadership opportunities. So there's a lot, in addition to what we're talking about for white women, that happens for Black women and women of color as well, in terms of not just pay, but opportunity, the ability to move up. And the siloing for Black women is, in terms of where you start in an organization, is pretty much where you're going to finish, is very real.
As part of our Women in Insurance initiative at Million Women Mentors, we are taking a close look at how women compare to men at all ages and stages, if you will, of their workforce development, looking at their compensation and the benefits and the resources and supports that are in place, and building on the success of our 2018 survey, our data initiative. We are looking at race this year as well. So we're really proud of that. It's a very actionable effort that our insurance members are taking, and we're so grateful and proud to be doing that. Well, we are at time. I cannot thank you all enough for being here today. When you look at the participant list, the numbers stayed up all the way to the very end. So that tells me that this was a really important topic, that you all are amazing speakers. So grateful for your time. There will be a follow-up of today's meeting that will go out to everyone next week. Thank you so very much to everyone for being here today. We appreciate you.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks, y'all. Take care.
Bye-bye.